Well, good day, everyone. I hope you are all healthy and safe. I'm Angelo Volpe, Executive Vice President of CVSN, and welcome to our second in a series of webinars hosted by CVSN to try and give you the tools necessary to get you through this massive disruption in your business and everyday life. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to remind everyone that the webinar is being recorded, so anyone from your company who could not join us will be able to view it on the CVSN and GenNext websites. If you have questions during the session, just type it into the Q&A panel or the chat room, and Dr. Bates will answer it at the end of his presentation with the Q&A section. He will also give you his contact information if you need to follow up on any item that was discussed today. You were sent the session handout with the invitation to the webinar, but if you don't have it, email Jeff Volpe at jvolpe@cvsn.org, or Jeff will post it in the chat room. We are proud to have Dr. Bates with us today. Dr. Bates is founder and principal of the Distribution Performance Project, a research and education entity focusing exclusively on distribution. He makes approximately 100 presentations each year on topics such as improving the bottom line, doing more with less, and pricing for profit. He also heads the firm's investigation into profitability research for over 50 different trade associations. Al received his doctorate from Indiana University. He's married and has 3 daughters. All 4 of the ladies in his life have black belts in Taekwondo, so don't be too harsh or critical of his presentation today. Al has presented at CVSN, our DTE, and also at HDAW. You can buy his book, Breaking Down the Profit Barriers in Distribution, from Amazon or Barnes & Nobles. So I'm pleased to present Dr. Al Bates.
Right. Thank you, Angelo. Delighted to be with everybody today to talk about getting to the financial light at the end of the tunnel. I wish the title was Expanding Our Businesses in This Dynamic Growing Market, but it's not. We got to play it the way it lays. And what we're going to try to do is see what we have to do to be successful in the short run. And then when we come out of this dark tunnel, that be even stronger than we are now and enjoy the financial rewards of having a great business. I've got 3 quick ground rules before I start. Number 1 is you should have a handout. Actually, change that. You must have a handout. If you do not have a handout, you need to get one or maybe listen to the recording at a later time. Number 2, I'm going to step on what Angelo said. I'm not going to do a Q&A here specifically, but I want you to be able to ask a question and get it to me directly. So on the handout, the 3rd line from the bottom is my email address. When we're done here, if you have a question, send me an email. I will answer it in as much detail as I can, and it'll be private between you and me. Nobody else will know what we're doing. Typically, I answer emails the same day, but right now I am up to my ears in webinars, so it may be a day or 2, but I promise you I will answer it. And number 3, this is the most important ground rule of all. I am not going to tell you how to run your business. I'm not going to tell you what you should do in this environment. I have listened to a lot of webinars recently and read a lot of articles, and they all basically are the 5 things you need to do in a down market. Well, nobody knows what's going to happen. Nobody has any idea. And anybody who tells you here are the 5 things you have to do or the 1 thing you have to do, they're making it up as they go. What I'm going to try to do, and I hope I can do it successfully, is give you some structure so that you can think about your business and say, given what you think is going to happen and your other manager friends think is going to happen, what sort of action should we take? But this situation, folks, where you got to make your own decisions, I cannot make them for you because I have no idea what's going to happen and nobody else does. But let me give you some structure if we could. With that said, let's jump inside the handout. The exhibits are numbered in the lower left-hand corner, and exhibit number 1 says, what are we going to do for 45 minutes? I'd like to do 4 things. Number 1, I want to outline a financial appraisal of where the firm stands. That is, I want to get you some tools to look at your business and say, where are we on the spectrum from panic to relaxed? And we're all somewhere in that particular spectrum. I'm going to give you 2 key ratios to look at. There's probably 100 ratios you should look at, and Probably you ought to look at all of them. But I'm going to give you two that I think are essential to have a real strong understanding of where we are. Number two, I want to identify what I call the key mistakes in the past. And mistakes is a strong term. More likely, human nature would be what we ought to talk about. But I was around for 9/11, and we made some mistakes. What the heck? I was around for the Great Recession, and we made the same mistakes then as we did after 9/11. And again, the same human nature sorts of activities. I'd like to avoid them the third time around if we can. Maybe we can't because human nature is still human nature, but I want to outline the mistakes we made in the past, and then you can figure out what you want to do. When we have about 15 minutes left, I want to put together an action plan to talk about how to be more successful long term. When we come out of this recession, I want you to be a stronger company than you are now. And I want to outline some ways I think we could get there. And then finally, in about the last 3 minutes, I'm going to give you some free software. Notice the word free. Free does not mean junky, terrible, doesn't work. Free means I've spent about 30 years putting this stuff together, and I've got some Excel files that are pretty darn good in all candor that will help you make decisions stronger in your particular business. Good. With those out of the way, let's start with the first one. What do we have to worry about? What should we be looking at? What ratios are important? And to do that, we first need a company. And in exhibit number 2, I've got a company. It is labeled a typical company in the industry, and it is kind of typical. It's a CVSN member. It's doing $20 million of revenue. That means, folks, it is a small business. And if it's a small business, you got to make a lot of decisions all the time, and you got to do almost everything in the business. The one good thing we have is we got a gross margin of 35%. That's a nice, fat, juicy margin involved with some service that we do. So we got a higher margin than most pure distributors do. So we're in pretty good shape. Down below that, I got my expenses, and I'm breaking them into 2 categories, payroll and fringe benefits, which is everybody's W-2, plus all the FICA, Medicare, 401k programs, and health insurance. It's fully loaded. Down below that, all other expenses is everything that's not payroll. Rent, utilities, depreciation, interest, bad debts, whole laundry list. Notice for right now, and this is important because we'll come back to it, payroll is twice as big as everything else. So when we start talking about things we have to do, we have to look at payroll. I'm not going to be a slash and burn guy. I'm not going to suggest got to start cutting payroll today. Not going to say that. But I am going to say as we move forward and come out of this recession, we need to be aware of the payroll situation because it's a little bit tacky for us right now. All right, if I take my total expenses, which $6.2 million, subtract it from my gross margin, I got a bottom line profit pre-tax of $800,000 or 4% of revenue. And I believe the 4% is left blank there in your handout. So just jot it down if you would. Every dollar of revenue produces 4 pennies of profit pre-tax. Now, that's not bad. We can be thankful that this pandemic did not hit at the middle of the Great Recession. If not, there would be blood on the floor. Right now, we're in pretty good shape starting off. So that gives us a great opportunity to recover successfully if things work out well. Down below that, at the bottom of Exhibit 2, I've got 2 more numbers. These are essential. Most companies do not know these numbers. I need you to know these. It's absolutely essential. They are my fixed expenses and my variable expenses. My fixed expenses are those expenses that only change when you take an action. For example, if we say, hey, we're in a recession, we need to cut travel expense, which is one of the first expenses everybody cuts. Well, if you cut travel expenses, you have reduced your fixed expenses. But that only happened because you did something. You took an action. And that's the nature of fixed expenses. We're about a quarter into this particular year. You have a budget you set up. Those expenses are only going to change if you take an action. In very sharp contrast, variable expenses change automatically. That means that when sales go up or sales go down, the variable expenses go up or down in proportion to sales. And I have made them 5% of revenue. That's arbitrary, but I think pretty close. You need to go back to your business and make sure you understand your fixed and variable expenses because you can't plan going forward without knowing that. I'll also give you a word of warning. Most companies tend to overstate what they think the variable expenses are. And when push comes to shove, when sales go down, the variable expenses aren't as big as you think they are, but you got to know what they are. So we got income statement, fairly typical. On exhibit number 3, we got a balance sheet, which is a little bit of a sadder situation. I don't have an entire balance sheet. I just have 4 items. I have cash, $167,000. And what this says is you folks are like all distributors in the world. You don't have a lot of cash. Okay, that is not bad, but it's also a little bit of a challenge. What we have in spades is we have a lot of accounts receivable, and we have a lifetime supply of inventory, $5.5 million. Down at the bottom, it says, hey, we owe our suppliers $1.5 million. And this is where a lot of distributors panic that, gee, I owe my suppliers $1.5 million, and I've only got $167,000 in the bank. Not a reason to panic. As long as the railroad keeps running, I sell product, collect, pay my suppliers. It's all wonderful. When the railroad slows down or when the railroad stops, it gets a little nastier, and we'll talk about what the implications are going forward. But in a normal period, wouldn't even begin panic. All right, what are these 2 ratios I think you need to calculate and I think are life and death? The first is the break-even point. And what I want to measure is how much of a sales decline can you have without resorting to desperation measures. Desperation measures means you don't just cut things you should have cut originally, like travel. You begin to cut infrastructure. You get rid of people. And then when the recession's over, you have to add infrastructure back. About the most dysfunctional thing we can do is cut and add, cut and add, cut and add. So I want to ask the question, how much of a sales decline could you have before you have to get into that mode? And then the second ratio, which you've never heard of, because I invented it about 5 days ago, is how slow can collections get before I begin to impact my cash? And that's a crucial factor to understand. So we're going to look at one factor looking at profit, one factor looking at cash. Let's start doing that on Exhibit 5. Exhibit 5 is entitled The Breakeven Point, and I've put a title up there, which I kind of like. The results when the band stops playing. What happens when sales get slow or non-existent? What's my break-even point? Exhibit 5 is the definition. It is the calculation. It is the formula. But that's only a means to exhibit number 6, which is what we really want to know is what's the implication. But we can't know the implication until we do the formula. It requires 3 things. Your gross margin percentage. If you do not know that, you do not have an accounting system. It also requires your fixed expenses and your variable expenses. Your fixed expenses in dollars, your variable expenses as percent of sales. And again, if you've done the analysis, you should know that. Down in the formula, it says we're going to take our fixed expenses. Now, in the old days, before most of you folks were born, we used to call that the nut. It's what we have to cover each year, what we have to pay out for the year, and it's $5 million too. But every dollar of sales is not a dollar to cover those fixed expenses because I got to pay my suppliers and I got the variable expenses. So the answer is every dollar is worth 30 cents. How many 30 centers do I need before I break even? And the answer is 17,333,333, an ugly looking number. All right, so you can calculate this formula if you've got the numbers, which you should have. What does it mean? That's really the key point. And Exhibit 6, what happened there? And what it says is your break-even point, if you're typical, rests upon a sales decline of about 13%. I put something up on the screen that's not in your handout. Write it down. I would like you to have a 20% safety factor. That's a goal that I think is realistic. Now, how did I get to that goal? After 9/11, I was so brilliant and so insightful, I said, we need a 10% safety factor. Then we had the Great Recession, and a lot of distributors' sales went down 20%. So I said, maybe I wasn't quite as smart as I thought I was. I've now put on belt and suspenders. I'd like to be at 20%. That's arbitrary, but folks, I have thought it through. We're at 13.3. Is that a problem? Depends on what happens out there. But it's not quite where we'd like it to be. And when we get to the end of this session, and I talk about what to do going forward, I want you to remember, let's build this business so it has a 20% safety factor. Now, what tends to happen is that when sales go down, if you don't cut the fixed expenses, which you can do, it's allowed, but if you don't cut the fixed expenses, the variable expenses go down right with sales. They're 5% of a lower number, and the bottom line profit is zero. Before we move on, an important point. I'm looking at this for the entire year. This is where you've got to begin to say, what do I think is going to happen? Most of us had a really good January and a really good February. Most of us had a decent March. April is not a month we want to write home to mom about. But what's going to happen in May, June, July, August, I don't know. You got some opinions. If you think your sales for the entire year are going to be down more than 13.3%, you've got to make some start decisions. If you think the sales the entire year are only going to be down 10%, then you got a different decision. I can't make that decision for you. All I can tell you is you need to say, what is your break-even point? And for some of you, it might be down 13%. For some of it might be 20%. We'll talk about that in a couple of seconds. You got to figure it out. The second ratio is the collection issue, the collection sensitivity ratio. Before I can get to that, I got to go to Exhibit 7 and look at two ratios that are crucial in life. Let me look at the bottom ratio first. It's called the collection period, or the DSO, the days sales outstanding. You look at this all the time. How fast are customers paying their bills? Okay, and we like to look at that ratio and see, can we speed up collections? Are they slowing down? What's going on? When benchmarking analytics calculates this ratio in your benchmarking report, they need to calculate the first ratio or the top ratio first. You never look at this ratio. That's okay. It's called collection per day. It's something only a financial guy like me would be interested in. How much money comes in every day from the fact that we sold things and they've not yet paid us? If we take our annual credit sales, and let's assume the entire 20 million is on credit, there are 365 days in a year. I brilliantly figured that out. Every day we receive about $54,000 of checks. May come in by checks, may come in electronically. Have no idea how it comes in, don't care. But this is the number. It's a crucial number. Every day we get $54,000 of cash. I then take that into my DSO at the bottom and say, hey, we're owed $2 million right now. 54,000 is how much comes in every day. It'll take me 36 days to collect from everybody. And that's the way we run the railroad. Now, I want to take that top number. I'd like to give you some numbers that are not pleasant on Exhibit 8, the collection sensitivity ratio. We're going to take our cash on hand, which is $167,000. It's tight. We're going to take our collections per day, which is 54,000, and we're going to say, if everybody pays us 3 days slower, we run out of cash because of accounts receivable. So that means the people who pay us in 35 pay us in 38. The people who pay us in 40 pay us in 43. And the people who drag us out for 60 pay us in 63. If they all pay 3 days later, we're going to run out of cash simply because of accounts receivable collections. 3 days, a 36-day base. If I take my brilliant calculator and take 3.1 and divide by 36.5, I come up with, that's about 8.5%. That's tight. And I got to tell you, this is the one issue that gives me a little bit of concern about where we are. But I'll also talk about the fact that we need to keep selling stuff, so I got to keep providing credit. I would like this ratio to also be about a 20% gap. And so if you got 36 and a half days, which is where we are averaging in this industry, times 20%, I'd like you to be able to have about a 7-day gap that would drive you out of cash. But we are what we are. We'll just have to play with it. You need to begin to run that for your own business. All right, take a deep breath. Try not to hyperventilate and go to Exhibit 9, and let's talk about the fact that in every industry, everybody is not typical. I've got the volume sensitivity of 3 profit groups. And what I've labeled here is typical, high profit, and low profit. Typical is the average bear in your survey, the middle company. And we said it had a 4% bottom line, 13.3% break even. The high profit folks, we look at those folks. We do this survey for a reason, incidentally, so we can see what happens. The high profit folks are making about a 6% bottom line, and they could take a 20% sales hit, which I believe was my magic number. I didn't pull that out of the air. That happens to turn out to be exactly what it is. Now, you folks don't calculate low profit. Okay, that's not very pleasant. But I went back and looked at your data and analyzed it, and the low profits seem to be around 2% bottom line, which means they don't have much breathing room at all. We need to at least be typical going forward, and ideally, I want you to be high profit going forward, and we'll talk about how to get there at the last part of our discussion. All right, so I got two things to worry about. I got to worry about my break-even point, and I got to worry about my cash position. What I now want to do is identify the mistakes from the past to be avoided. What things should I not do? And the number one thing that we all do, we'll talk about in a second. For right now, I want to give you a graph. Oh, there's a lot of lines on this graph. That's not good. It's okay. We'll understand it. The relative impact of improvements in the CPVs. The CPVs are the critical profit variables, the things that drive profit. They are sales, gross margin, expenses, inventory, and accounts receivable. And I got a little graph. And this graph on the vertical axis says we're starting at a PBT, profit before taxes, of 4%. And then we're saying, what if we did 5%, 10%, 15 better on some of these factors? What would happen to my PBT? Let's look at the two bottom lines first, which are inventory and accounts receivable. And they say, hey, if we were to cut inventory or accounts receivable 10% or 15%, PBT doesn't go up much at all. Inventory and accounts receivable are gigantic, huge, behemoth impacts on cash. They do not have a big impact on profit, and I'll prove that in a couple of seconds. But if we're trying to manage cash, I got to look at inventory and accounts receivable. The factors that drive profit are the ones up above. There's kind of an aquamarine line, which is sales. And it says, hey, as sales goes up, profit goes up. But if you remember, as sales goes up, variable expenses also go up. So the line's not as steep as we'd like it. The line above that is expenses. And this is what it says, which is not pleasant. A 10% expense cut has a bigger impact on your bottom line than a 10% sales increase. Now, that relationship says nothing about market share. It says nothing about motivating employees, because I think employees can be motivated to drive more sales. I have trouble motivating employees to let's cut expenses. It's a little negative. But what you need to be aware is expenses are more impactful on profit than sales. And right now, we probably need profit. The top line says the biggest driver of all is gross margin. So I want you to keep in the back of your mind as we go forward to the next few exhibits, gross margin is the biggest driver, expenses is the second biggest driver, sales is third, inventory and accounts receivable are almost non-existent for profit, but are huge cash drivers. All right. What mistakes do we make? Well, we make the same mistake every single blooming time, and it bothers the daylights out of me. And that is we say, hey, sales are weak, let's cut prices. Okay. What you're doing, folks, is making a bad situation worse, nothing more. And the title of this exhibit is The Increase in Unit Sales Required to Exactly Offset a Price Reduction. And I've got a little line. That line has dots on it. Every one of those dots keeps your bottom line PBT at $800,000, which is where it is now. And it says, let's cut price 1% to 10%. And let's ask ourselves, how much more physical volume do we have to do? If you go over to the 5% line and come back to the left, it says we got to do about 20% more physical volume. Well, we've cut price by 5%, which says 20 plus 5. We got to do 25% more dollar volume. I'm going to tell you, in a down market, you cannot make that work. And I want to give you a real quick vignette because I thought it was wonderful. On the news the other day, there was a story about a guy who runs a food cart, a food wagon outside an office building. And on a typical day, he sells 100 meals. He was knocking them dead. Then the coronavirus hit, and not very many people showed up for work. And he said he only sold 20 meals. So he said, hey, I'm going to cut my price 15%. And he cut his price 15%, and he still sold 20 meals. Folks, when they're not buying, they're not buying. So we need to not cut price. Here's the problem. You have idiot competitors. And those idiot competitors, the first thing they do in a down market is they cut price. We, in some instances, are forced to follow along. But what I'd like to do is follow along only in certain areas. So let's go to Exhibit 12, if we could, real quick, and look at your products, A, B, C, and D items. A, B, C, and D. A items, which I said are 60% of your sales, are those items that are the most price sensitive. They're the ones that are most like commodities. B items are pretty good items. They're the 20% of my sales, less price sensitive. C items, 15% of my sales, very price insensitive. And then D items, the last 5%, nobody cares what the price is. If you are forced to cut price and you only cut it on the A items because those are the commodity items that your customers know what your price is, I can limit the damage. Not easily, but it says if I could do the following three things, I could keep my gross margin right where it is. If I could raise the B items 5%, the C items 6.7, and the D's 20, I could keep my gross margin right where it is. Now, I've argued long and hard for many years that you can raise the prices on the D items, nobody cares. I don't know about the B's and C's, but at least this gives you an idea about where we stand. If you could hold the price cut on the A's down to maybe 1%, all those numbers go down by a factor of 5. You got to figure it out on your own. All right, let's talk about the second thing that is a problem or a mistake. That's mistake strong, human nature. We tend to cut the collection period or get real tight on credit. I have no problem with getting tight on credit because net never is not a good term of sale. However, people buy from you because you provide credit. And let's look at the implication from both a cash and a profit point of view. We have collections per day, $54,795, I believe, if that was back true on exhibit number 7, and it was. That's how much money comes in every day. If we get paid in 36 and a half days, 54,000 times 36 and a half, we're sitting on $2 million of AR, which we, in fact, are sitting on $2 million of AR. If I could cut it 5 days, force everybody to pay 5 days quicker, I could cut my collection period to 31 and a half. I'm going to make a mega assumption. We do that without losing any sales. That's a tight one, but let's go with the flow. I'm going to still have the same 54,000 because I'm doing the same sales volume. Times 31 and a half days, my AR goes down to $1.7 million, or line 6. I free up $273,000 of cash. That is a gigantic cash change. Absolutely. Because if I recall, and I get confused because I do so many of these, we had cash of $167,000. I've more than doubled my cash. But what's the profit impact? The profit impact is there's something called the carrying cost. And the carrying cost, just like there's an inventory carrying cost, is a cost of providing credit. It is interest on accounts receivable. It's bad debts. It is the cost of hounding people, and it's about 8%. If I take 8% times 273, it's $21,000. So I got a lot of cash, but not a real big impact on profit. Let's try to trade off those two factors in exhibit number 14. And this is where, again, it comes back to you. I wish I could tell you what to do, but I can't. I can just tell you where we stand. We're going to measure the break-even point. How much would sales have to go down to wipe out what we just gained from collecting faster? And we're going to have the break-even point. And I'm just going to give you the numbers real quick. We have fixed expenses of $5.2 million. We've had those since exhibit number 2. We're making a profit of $800,000. We've got $21,918 that we gained in profit from collections, but I'm going to subtract it. I'm going to have then my 35% gross margin and my 5% variables, and I'm going to give you the punchline. Write it down. 0.4%. And what that says is if you collect 5 days faster, if your sales go down 0.4%, you've wiped out all the profit impact. Now, again, I can't tell you what to do because I need the cash, but I also need the sales. You've got to look at this trade-off for yourself and say, what do I think is going to happen with my particular customers. Are they hurting? Are they bleeding? Are they okay? Are they paying slightly slower, same rate? I don't know, but you got to figure it out. One last mistake, and then we'll move on to looking for the future, which is a lot more fun. Inventory. I'm going to give you a statement which you'll not believe. People do not buy from you because you're good looking. They buy from you because you have stuff they want. And whenever we have a recession, the first thing we do with inventory is we have this edict, stop buying. That's a kiss of death. And I said I wasn't going to tell you what to do, but this is the one area I will tell you, you cannot go into stop buying mode. Inventory's got a challenge. It's trying to do two things at the same time. In the middle column, we're trying to provide customer service. I want customers to keep buying from me. In the right-hand column, I also have to provide financial stability. I don't want to be up to my ears in inventory. These are conflicting factors. We calculate the customer service with the fill rate, our service level, whatever you call it. We calculate financial stability with inventory turnover. Here's the rub. It is extremely difficult to measure the fill rate, almost impossible to calculate the fill rate. It is very easy to calculate inventory turnover. And here's a rule of human nature. If you have something that's difficult to calculate and something that's easy, you migrate towards the easy. The implications are more inventory or less inventory. And I believe there are little mantras that go with these. The sales force has said this a million times, can't sell apples from an empty cart. The financial folks have said the same thing, cash is king. Here's the challenge. People buy from you because you have things they want. And that's in Exhibit 16. This particular analysis has been done in distribution probably a million times, and it comes up with the same thing every time. What do customers want from distributors in every industry? The number one thing they want is a good fill rate because they need it now, and they should have ordered it 2 days ago, but they didn't. They need it now. If you cut the inventory by saying, let's stop buying, the first thing you'll run out of is the good stuff. Your fill rate will die. What you really need to do is cut the bad stuff, but hey, nobody's buying the bad stuff, so it's kind of tacky to try to figure this out. They also want depth of assortment. They want you to be one-stop shopping. They want you to be speed of delivery. Then they want you to have order accuracy, and pricing is in fifth place. Honest to goodness, these are ranked from most important to least important. I do not want you to issue a stop buying edict. I want you to think about your inventory, and if there's a way to get rid of junk that we should not have to begin with, we ought to do that, but please don't go down a let's stop buying path. All right, third thing we're going to do today is talk about after we come out of this dark era, what do we need to do to be where we'd like to be? I want you to be a high profit company, and I got two things I want you to do, or three things I want you to do. Number one, I want to look at payroll. And Exhibit 17 is entitled, What's Wrong with This Picture? These are numbers from your benchmarking report. Between 14 and 18, sales per employee was stagnant. And if we go down to the bottom in that time period, payroll's percent of sales went up. We've got a challenge. And that challenge is, if you remember before the proverbial poop hit the wall here, you couldn't find employees at any price. There was an upward pressure on payroll that was dramatic. And we've been facing that challenge. Now, maybe we come out of this, it's going to be easier to find people because there's going to be a lot of people unemployed. Terrible way to think about it. But we got to get control of payroll. We really do. And I've got one area I really want you to look at. And on Exhibit 18, I've taken your payroll, which I believe is 21% of sales. That's what it was way back on good old Exhibit number 2. And I've broken it out into the subcategories. Owners and officers are 4.5% of sales. Salesforce is 9.5%. Operations, warehouse delivery, 2.5%. And all other, which is all the office employees, all sort of people out there doing those things. Now, where should I be looking to cut? I'm going to put a number on the board, and please write this in your notebook. Officers and owners are about 20% of my payroll. I'm not going to suggest we cut their salary. I don't think that wins me a lot of friends. But I am going to tell you, Salesforce jumps out like a big, bloated gout engaged big toe, 45%. We need to get control of the Salesforce payroll. Now, most people in sales are good, but the reality is in the American economy, we need more salespeople than we have people with sales talent. Sales is probably the most difficult job in the American economy. It's really difficult. Most people don't have selling skills. So I want you to go back and look at your salespeople and say, do we have some that are doing sensational, which you do? Do we have some that are not carrying their weight? And I'd like you to say, let's make some decisions about those people that are not carrying their weight. And this is a good time to do that. I'm not trying to make you a bunch of jackasses. I didn't say that. But here's the reality. We tend to carry people longer than we should because we know how expensive it is to hire a replacement. But if you have somebody who's not cutting it in sales, they're costing you every day of your life. If somebody in the warehouse is a doofus, that's the way life is. If somebody's a doofus in sales, they're killing your business. Now, there's also been a lot of talk about trying to rethink whether we need as many salespeople. I'll leave that up to you because I don't know. But a lot of people argue we're going to have a new sales model, whatever a new sales model means. But for right now, let's make sure everybody's carrying their weight. Second thing I want you to do is on exhibit number 19, and I want you to come back and look at what we like to call order economics. This is an extremely hot topic in distribution today. You need to be on top of that. And all it simply says is we need to make sure that every order is as close to a profitable order as it can be. Let's assume we currently have 140,000 orders. We're not going to change that. We're not going to go out and get new customers. What we're going to do is we're going to try to manage this order base better. And let's see on line 2, could we put more lines on every order? And notice my number is gigantic. I'd like to put 1/10 of a line more on every order. That's close to nothing. Beyond that, it rounds to 0. But it's crucial. That small change has a dramatic impact on our ability to succeed. And I would like you to come out and measure that. Here's a word of warning. If you have no idea what this number is, guess what? You can't improve it. You need to know this by salesperson, by customer, by all sorts of things. And then if we got 3.1 lines on the same number of orders, we've got more lines ordered. And then if we bump our fill rate just a little bit, I don't have line 5, 400,000 lines filled. I have 414,000 lines filled. This operationally is a home run. It's also a home run strategically, because if you're doing 14,000 more lines, your competitors collectively are doing 14,000 fewer lines. You're killing them without them knowing they are being killed. And then if I could make the average order line higher by maybe raising my prices here and there, I'm going to have 20,917 in sales. That's an increase of, write it down, 4.6%. That is what we call organic growth. Organic growth is the key to success in distribution, because we're going to take that organic growth. The market's going to grow as it comes back. We're going to have inflation. We're going to have all sorts of things that will cause your sales to go up 6, 7, 8, 9, 10%. But I need the organic growth. If I don't, I'm relying on the market growing for me. You can't rely on that. I'm relying on inflation. You can't rely on that. You need organic growth. The last thing you need to do, and I got to do this quickly, is you need to come back and look at your customer base. And this has been done, again, in industry after industry. And what it says, if you look at your customers, you can break them into 4 categories. High profit, those that you make a ton of money on. They're about 15% of your customers, and you make the dollar equivalent of all your profit. That simply says we would make $800,000 on those customers. And you're saying that can't be true. Folks, this has popped up every single time it's been done in probably 20 different distribution industries. You've got a few customers that give you the lion's share of your profit. Send them a Christmas card. We've got another group called Good Profit, about 15% of your customers. Okay, and 15% of your customers give you a third of your profits. I've got those that give me some profit. About a third of my customers 10%, and now I've got unprofitable. 1/3 of my customers, I service them for the thrill of servicing them, and they give me a loss of 45% of my profit. What that says is I'm going to take $800,000 times 45%. You're losing $360,000 on those customers. I don't want you to fire them. I want you, though, to work with them to make them more profitable for you. This is a long, involved process, but you got to do it. And so I've given you 3 things to do going forward. Get the sales force in order, worry about order economics, and get the customers in line. If you do that, you're going to have more sales, more margin, less expenses. You're going to be in great shape. All right, I got one more thing to do, and I'll do this fairly quickly because I'm in pretty good shape. Identify some free software that might help you in planning. Okay, I have written a bunch of Excel files, and they're available on my website. And on Exhibit 21, I indicate what my website is. It is distperf.com. That stands for distributionperformance.com. If you go to that website and you toggle over to the Programs tab and then go down the page to where it says Hands-On Tools, you'll find 5 Excel files there. These Excel files are available to you free of charge. The one you might really want to look at right now is the top one, What If? Because you can take that Excel file and you can plug in your assumptions about what's going to happen. Let's plug in sales down 15%. Let's plug in cut my prices 2%. You'll see what happens to your profit, your cash, your entire business. And you can make all sorts of assumptions, and that's what you need right now in this uncertain market. There's also one on price cutting economics that lets you look at that little curve I put up there originally that helped me keep $800,000. What does that curve look like for me? Excuse me, it's allergy season in Colorado, and I am dying from allergies. Business valuation. If you're saying, hey, I'd like to retire, there's one to value your business. Understanding the CPVs. If you recall that graph that had 5 lines going across, this particular Excel file lets you do that. And there's one called Profit First Planning, which I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about because I think it's crucial longer term. Before you get too excited, if you go to my website and download one of these Excel files, it's going to say, hey, this is password protected. You have to send Al an email and he will give you the passwords. I promise you, I will only answer that email. I will not send you any trashy emails about buy my book or use my services. I think that's disgusting, although every consultant does it. I will only send you the passwords. Or if you send me an email with a question, which I said you could do, I'll also answer your question. Let me spend a couple of minutes on that last one, Profit First Planning, because I am convinced if we're going to have the next time we have a problem, I want to have a 20% safety factor on break even. I've got to be more profitable. And that gets me to exhibit number 22. I would like you to at least think about the way you plan. When we plan, the first thing we plan is sales. Of course, it's the top line of the income statement. What else would you plan first? Then I plan my margin, then I plan my expenses. Here's the problem. If you start with sales, you subtract cost of goods and you get gross margin. You subtract expenses, you get profit. Profit is whatever is left over after you stop subtracting. It's the way we've planned for 100 years. I think it's dumb. I'd like you to consider what's called Profit First Planning, which says the first thing you should plan each year is how much profit you should make. That is extremely controversial because people tell me you can't know your profit until you know your sales. And I'm saying, hey, yes, you can, because you figure out your profit. And then you ask yourself, how much do I have to sell to make that profit? What margin do I need to make that profit? How do I control expenses to make that profit? It is controversial, but I'm going to tell you this. Companies that have used this concept have dramatically improved their profit. It's not a guarantee in life, but it usually works out that way. Let me spend 30 seconds on Exhibit 23, which just shows the first screen from this Profit First template. At the very top in that little box that's blue, it says plan planning profit first. Goal 1, plan profit first. Go down to the box. Don't read the stuff in between. You can read that later if you want to. It says, hey, what's my current profit? Because you've entered some numbers, $500,000. What's my current ROA? 5%. What's my target profit? And you can enter any blooming number you want to enter on the face of the earth. I enter $600,000. Anytime there's a little yellow box, you can enter a number. And it says, hey, you've increased your profit by 20% and your ROA is going to go up to 6%. And then down at the bottom, this is what is really pretty clever about this Excel file. Since I invented it, I can say it's clever. Profit Guru will talk back to you. It says, hey, that's a pretty small change in ROA. You're sandbagging. Typically, a 1-year change is between 2 to 3 points. You don't have to listen to Profit Guru, but on every exhibit, it will talk back to you and say, are you within the range of what is considered reasonable? Good. I'm going to do a 30-second sales call, and then I'm going to summarize. I wrote a great book, as Angelo indicated, called Breaking Down the Profit Barriers in Distribution. Every manager should read this. So all I want is for each of you to buy 10 copies, available on Barnes & Noble or Amazon, either one. Let me summarize what we said, then I'll turn it back to Angelo. We said about 3 things. 1, we said you need to know where you are going into this recession. What's your break-even point, and what is your sensitivity with regard to collections on your cash position? You must calculate those. Calculate as many other ratios as you want. We also said don't make the same mistakes we made in the past. Don't get into a price-cutting game. Weigh carefully cutting accounts receivable to gain cash versus does it kill my sales? Just weigh that carefully. I don't know which way you should go, but think about it. Do not issue a stop buying order or I will scream. And then going forward, think about the sales force because we spend more on sales in this industry than any other industry in distribution. We really do. We're really heavily sales driven. We need to also make sure we look at our order economics. Are we getting all the revenue we can on each order? And then finally, we should look at the customers that we have and begin to say, let's worry about those that are not profitable for us. Let's send Christmas cards to the good ones, but let's begin to change the way that the others buy. And then let's look at some free software. With that, let's go out and make more money than we do because you deserve to make more money. You're nice folks. Let's also stay safe in the meantime. Thanks for letting me take part.
Thank you, Dr. Bates. Great job as usual. I hope you can use the takeaways from Dr. Bates' presentation today to help your businesses get through this COVID-19 crisis. And please email Al with any questions that you may have, and he'll take good care of you. We want to thank everyone for participating. We will be scheduling more webinars in the very near future, and I hope you will join us. By the way, as a CVSN member benefit, your company can participate in a benchmarking survey that is conducted by John McKay of the Benchmarking Analytics. Information and sign-up materials for this will be sent out very soon. And Al, if you're still on, can you mention anything about the benefits of actually doing this now that what we've gone through in 2020 and also
Absolutely.
2019?
Sure, I think it's great because what you're going to have is you're going to have a 2019 benchmark. Then when you do it again in 2020, you're going to see how did various companies respond in a down market? How did the typical company respond in a down market? And I think you're going to gain a lot of information. I know it's time consuming. It's not as bad as you think it is, but it's time extremely well spent. You cannot go forward until you know what do the high profit companies do. If I want you to be a high profit, you first got to know what they do. So please take part in the benchmarking survey.
Thank you, Dr. Bates. We wish you all the very best, and please stay healthy and safe and strong. And we'll talk again soon in another webinar. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.